Montana Territory, August 1880. The fire had already taken everything when she stepped onto the road with a baby in her arms and smoke in her hair. Nara Thomley did not cry. Not when she saw the roof cave in with her husband still inside. Not when her baby screamed from the sling on her chest as heat scorched the earth behind them. And not now, as she walked down the long dirt road away from the ashes of the only life she had known. Her legs ached. Her boots were worn thin. The baby, little Sylvie, was barely a week old, and Nara had no milk left in her. There was no family to turn to, no friends close enough to help. Only the road and the cold wind and the wide, empty west. By dusk, the sky turned purple behind the hills, and Nara's knees gave out 3 miles from the nearest town. She sank to the dirt, shielding Sylvie with her shawl, and tried to breathe through the pain in her chest. That was when the sound of hooves broke over the ridge. The horse slowed to a walk before her, and the man in the saddle pulled the reins gently. He was tall even when seated, lean but solid. Dust clung to the brim of his hat and the cuffs of his coat. He had a rifle strapped to his saddle and a lasso coiled at his side, but it was his eyes that stopped her breath, clear and steady like river stone. "You hurt?" he asked, his voice low. She blinked, too tired to answer. He dismounted. "Can you stand?" "I have a baby," she whispered. He crouched beside her, his hands careful. "I see that. You are freezing. Let me help you." "I do not know you," she said, even though her voice shook with weakness. "My name's Yates Callahan," he said. "I run a cattle ranch 6 miles west of here. You and your little one can come with me tonight." Warm bed, food, safe roof. Nara looked down at Sylvie's tiny face, flushed and damp with sweat. The baby whimpered, and Nara's heart clenched so tight it felt like it might stop. "I have nowhere else," she murmured. Yates nodded. "Then come with me." He lifted her gently onto his horse, then cradled Sylvie like he had done it before. Once he had Nara steady in the saddle, he handed the baby back to her and walked beside them, leading the horse through the dusk. His homestead sat low in a valley, ringed with cottonwoods and golden fields. The house was small but strong, with a wide porch and a soft light in the window. There was a barn nearby and the smell of hay and horses in the air. Inside, the warmth hit her like a memory. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows over a wooden table and 2 worn chairs. A kettle whistled on the stove. Yates helped her settle on the cot near the fire and brought her a blanket and a tin cup of warm milk. "I will get some goat's milk for the baby in the morning. For tonight, let her rest skin to skin with you. That will keep her warm." Nara looked up at him. "Why are you being kind to us?" Yates pulled off his coat and hung it by the door. "Because no one should be alone after something like that." Her throat burned. "You do not even know what happened." He met her eyes across the room. "I smelled the smoke, saw the sky red behind the ridge. That was no cooking fire." She looked down. "My husband died in the barn. I could not get to him." Yates stepped closer but did not touch her. "I am sorry." She nodded, her teeth biting her lip hard enough to taste blood. That night Nara slept with Sylvie tucked against her chest. The fire kept them warm. Yates did not ask questions. He left them be, sleeping on the floor beside the door, rifle within arm's reach, but his eyes closed in trust. In the morning, Nara woke to the sound of wind through the trees and the smell of cornbread baking. Sylvie stirred quietly, her tiny mouth opening and closing against her mother's skin. Yates was already outside, chopping wood with slow, steady swings. His shirt stuck to his back with sweat, and his hair curled slightly at the ends. When he saw her watching through the window, he tipped his head once in greeting. By the time she stepped out onto the porch with Sylvie wrapped in a blanket, he had already started a pot of coffee. "There is a creek down past those trees," he said. "It runs clean. Got goats for milk, hens for eggs. You are welcome to stay." Nara hesitated. "I do not have money. I do not need money." "Then what do you want?" He looked at her, really looked, and something gentle came into his face. "Just want to know you and that baby are safe." She sat down slowly on the porch step. Sylvie whimpered and Yates walked over, offering her a clean cloth rag soaked in warm goat's milk. "I do not know how to thank you," Nara whispered. "You do not have to." He sat beside her, quiet. They watched the sunrise together, the golden light touching the hills. Nara held her baby close, and for the first time in days her chest loosened. "I do not even know what day it is," she said. "August 3rd, Yates answered, "and it is going to be a good day." She looked at him, really looked, and felt something shift under her ribs. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the start of something she had not dared to imagine. All she knew was that, for the first time since the fire, she was not alone. The next morning brought a thin mist clinging to the fields and a hush over the valley like the world was holding its breath. Nara stood barefoot in the doorway, watching Sylvie sleep curled in the crook of a folded quilt. She listened to the faint rustle of hens in the coop and the steady scrape of Yates sharpening a drawknife at the workbench he'd set up beneath the cottonwoods. She stepped outside, arms crossed loosely, sleeves rolled to the elbow. "You always work this early?" Yates didn't look up from the blade. "Sun's up, I'm up. Summer don't last long this far north." She stepped down into the yard, gravel pressing smooth against her feet. "You have help," he gave the knife a final stroke, then set it aside. "Not since my brother left for Idaho, just me and the land now." She nodded, letting the quiet stretch. "Doesn't seem lonesome to you," he straightened. "Some days, but I got routine, cows to check, fences to mend. Timber to haul, it keeps the thoughts from crowding." She looked out toward the pasture where dew clung to the grass like 1,000 tiny suns. "I used to bake in the mornings before chores, bread mostly. My husband liked his with honey." Yates didn't press. He just followed her gaze toward the hills. "If you're feeling strong enough, I could use a hand feeding the goats." She glanced back at the house. "Sylvie'll sleep another hour or so." He handed her a pail. "They know the sound of the gate. They'll come running." They walked together past the barn, the goats bleating softly as they approached. Nara knelt, setting the pail down, and reached for the grain scoop. Her fingers were thinner than they'd been a month ago, but steady. "They're gentler than I expected," she said, as one nuzzled her palm. "They know who feeds them, same as people." She looked up then, the sun catching the edges of her face. "I didn't think I'd still be standing after that night." "You are," he said. "That counts." They worked in companionable silence, the kind that doesn't press but settles between two people like a shared coat on a cold morning. When they returned to the house, Sylvie had begun to stir. Nara bent to lift her, then paused. "She's not crying. She knows you're near," Yates said, standing behind her. She gathered the child close, brushing a kiss against the baby's temple. "She needs more than I can give her." "You're giving her everything," he said. "That's more than most ever get." The kettle began to rattle on the stove. Nara moved to it, pouring the water into a tin basin to cool. "Do you ever go into town?" "Only when I have to. Supplies mostly. Why?" "I need thread. And fabric, if I can get it cheap. I can't keep wearing the same thing every day." "I'll ride in tomorrow. There's a widow runs a dry goods shop. She'll give you fair price." Nara turned surprised. "You do that," he shrugged. "Seems to me you've already paid in full." She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I can sew. If you've shirts that need mending." "I've got more holes than buttons," he said with a faint smile. "You'd be doing me a kindness." She reached for a towel, dipping it into the basin and wringing it out. "I want to earn my keep." Yates walked to the door and leaned a shoulder against the frame. "You're not a burden." Nara met his eyes. "I want to believe that," he nodded once. "Then stay, as long as you need." That night, after Sylvie had fallen asleep again, Nara sat on the porch with a needle and one of Yates's shirts across her lap. A faint breeze stirred the hem of her skirt. The moon was near full, casting a silver glow over the pasture. Yates came to sit beside her, a lantern in his hand. He set it down between them and rested his arms on his knees. "First time I saw a fire like that, I was 12, he said. Lightning struck the neighbor's barn. We tried to form a line with pails, but it ate through the roof before we'd even begun." She threaded the needle without looking up. "Did anyone make it out?" He shook his head. 3 children inside, all gone by the time we got there." Nara's hand paused. "I'm sorry." I didn't tell you for sorrow, he said, only to say I understand what it does to a person, watching, knowing you can't stop it. She tied off the thread and folded the shirt. It stays with you, the sound, the heat. The helplessness. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small, smooth stone. He passed it to her without explanation. She turned it over in her hand. It was warm from his body, worn down to a soft oval. I keep it with me, he said. Found it the day after the fire. Something solid to hold on to. She closed her fingers around it. I don't have anything left of him, not even a button. You've got her, Yates said, nodding toward the crib inside. Her grip on the stone tightened. Yes. I've got her. They sat in silence after that, the kind that didn't need filling. When the lantern burned low, she stood and went inside, pausing in the doorway. Good night, Yates. Good night, Nara. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. She lay down beside her daughter, the stone still clutched in her hand. And for the first time since the fire, her dreams were not filled with smoke. The wind had shifted by late August, carrying with it the first hints of autumn. Mornings came colder now, enough that Nara wrapped a shawl around herself before stepping outside. The trees beyond the barn had begun to yellow at the edges, and the fields turned brittle with dry seed heads. Days passed in quiet rhythm, feeding, mending, gathering, rocking Sylvie to sleep when her cries broke through the stillness of early evening. Yates returned from town with more than she'd asked for. A bolt of muslin, a jar of blackberry preserves, and a carved teething ring for the baby. I didn't ask for this, she said, holding the ring between her fingers. He unsaddled his horse, brushing the dust from its flank. Didn't figure you needed to. Nara glanced down at the smooth wood, then tucked it gently into the cradle beside Sylvie. You think ahead. You look tired, he said, voice low. I am, she admitted, but not the kind that sleep fixes. He nodded and didn't press. That night, when the stars came out sharp against the black, she found herself watching him as he whittled by the fire, his hands steady even in the flickering light. The next morning brought rain, soft at first, then steady. It tapped against the roof and drummed into the rain barrel. Nara stood at the window, Sylvie pressed to her shoulder, watching the fields drink deep. I need to speak with the widow who runs the dry goods, she said over breakfast. I've thought about offering her my sewing. I could stitch for women expecting or mend for the men who work the cattle drives. If I earn a little, it's easier to stay without owing you. Yates looked up from his plate. You don't owe me, I know, but I'd like to stand on something of my own. He studied her a moment, then said, You want me to take you to town Saturday? I would, he nodded. We'll leave early. Sylvie can ride in the sling. They made the trip just after sunup, the wagon creaking gently over the rutted road. The rain had stopped, but the sky hung low and gray. Nara kept her eyes on the horizon most of the way, her fingers resting lightly on the baby's back. Town was smaller than she remembered. One main street, a few side alleys, and the scent of horse manure thick in the air. She felt stares, though no one said a word. She kept her chin level, her hands still. The widow, Mrs. Havers, wore her hair in a tight bun and spectacles low on her nose. She glanced up from her ledger when the door chimed. Yates Callahan, she said, then looked at Nara, and this must be the woman staying with you. I'm Nara Thomley, she said, voice calm. I can sew by machine or hand. If you need help with orders or repairs, I'm offering my work. Mrs. Havers adjusted her glasses. Can you do gussets and pleats? Yes, children's things, all of it. The widow looked her over, then nodded. Leave me 2 samples. I'll let you know by next week. As they stepped out onto the boardwalk, Yates said, You didn't flinch once. I've had worse things than judgment. They stopped at the feed store before heading home, and as Yates loaded sacks into the back, Nara caught him watching her. What is it? She asked. You carry yourself like someone who used to be still, he said, but something's always moving under the surface now. She didn't answer right away. Then, I was content once, not happy, not always, but settled. Then the fire came, and now I'm always listening for what might break next. You don't have to listen here, I know, she said, but it's hard to stop. On the wagon ride home, Sylvie fussed. Nara cradled her close, murmuring low to soothe her. Yates gave her a quiet glance, then reached over and adjusted the edge of the blanket against the wind. "Takes 2 hands to raise 1 child," he said. "Some folks forget that." She looked at him, truly looked. "You never married," he shook his head. "Came close once. But she had family back east and I couldn't leave the land. She didn't want to stay. She wanted a life without dust in her teeth. I didn't blame her." Nara turned toward the hills. "I used to dream of Boston, the theater, the shops. The howling wind here used to scare me. Now I can't sleep without it." They rode the rest of the way in silence, save for the creak of the wagon and the distant cry of hawks overhead. By the time they reached the homestead, the clouds had begun to part. That evening, Nara sat by the hearth, stitching a bodice from scrap muslin while Sylvie napped nearby. Yates brought in the last of the wood and dusted his hands off on his trousers. "You want coffee?" he asked. "I'd rather sit quiet," she said. "If you don't mind." He took the chair opposite her, stretching out his long legs. "I never did." The firelight flickered between them, casting shadows long and low. Outside, the rain had washed the air clean and the night was still. She didn't need to speak her thanks. He didn't need to ask for more. But something steady had begun to take root between them, like the first green after a hard frost, quiet, unassuming, but full of promise. September brought early frost to the high valley. Ice rimmed the troughs before dawn, and the goat's breath came in pale clouds. Nara began rising before the sun, binding Sylvie close against her chest with a strip of flannel, and stepping into the cold with a purpose that steadied her bones. She'd taken to baking again, using what flour Yates had left in the bin, shaping the dough with quick, practiced hands, the heat from the stove warming her face and wrists. One evening, after the day's tasks had wound down, Yates returned from the pasture with mud on his boots and something unreadable in his face. "Fence lines sagging near the ridge," he said, unbuckling his belt knife. "Found tracks elk mostly, but there were 2 prints deeper than the rest. Could be someone watched from up on the bluff." Nara stilled, one hand at the small of Sylvie's back. "Were they close?" "Far enough, but I'll ride out again at first light, see what's what." She shifted the baby in her arms. "You think it's trouble? I think it's Montana. Could be a trapper, could be a drifter. Could be someone with less honest reasons. Either way, I'd rather know." He didn't say more and she didn't ask. That night she kept Sylvie tucked beside her longer than usual, her hand resting over the child's chest, feeling the small rise and fall. The next day, Yates left before sunrise. Nara stayed busy hauling water, sweeping the porch, setting the dough for drying biscuits. But by midday, a dull weight settled in her ribs. The house felt too still. She kept glancing toward the window, waiting for the sight of his horse down the trail. He returned near sundown, his jaw tight but his shoulders loose. "Found the tracks," he said, dismounting. "Looks like someone passed through but didn't linger. No campfire, no mess. You're sure they're gone?" "For now, I'll ride the line every few days, just in case," she nodded. "I didn't realize how much I'd gotten used to the quiet. It's easy, once you know it won't turn on you." They ate supper in the lean light of evening. Sylvie gurgled from her bundle on the floor, batting at the hem of Nara's skirt. Yates watched with a quiet fondness that made something inside her shift. "She's starting to notice faces more," Nara said, reaching down to lift her. "When I speak, she turns toward me. She knows her mother." Nara traced Sylvie's cheek with her thumb. "When she's older, she'll ask about her father." He laid his spoon down. "What will you tell her?" "I'll say he was kind and meant well but didn't know how to carry the weight of things. That he tried, and sometimes that's braver than anything." Yates didn't speak right away. "Then, that's a fair thing for a child to hold on to." She met his gaze. "You ever think about children of your own?" "I used to," he said, voice low. "When the days were longer and I thought I'd have someone to share them with. But time passed and I stopped letting myself wonder." She rocked Sylvie gently. "What changed?" "I guess I started wondering again." The silence between them turned warm. She looked down at the child in her arms, then back at him. "I haven't known what to call this," she said quietly. "This place with you, it's not charity, it's not a debt. He stood slowly, walked to where she sat and crouched before her. "Call it home if you want." Her throat tightened. She reached out, not thinking, and brushed a loose curl from his temple. "I do," she whispered. Yates laid a hand over hers. "Then stay as long as you'll have me beside you." Outside, the wind had gone still. The fire crackled low. Sylvie yawned in her sleep, and Nara leaned forward, resting her brow against his no declarations, no promises carved in stone. Just the shared breath between them, the knowing. And in that moment, it was enough. The first snow came early that year. It dusted the porch rails and settled in the creases of the hills, softening the sharp edges of the land. Nara stood at the window before sunrise, one hand clutching her shawl closed, eyes resting on the pale hush outside. Sylvie stirred in the cradle behind her, too young to understand the change, too small to feel anything but the heat of her mother's skin. Yates entered quietly, brushing snow from his shoulders. He carried a small bundle wrapped in canvas which he set on the table without a word. "You were out before light," Nara said, turning from the window. "Trapped a hare in the drawer," he said, unwrapping the catch. "Thought I'd make stew tonight." Her gaze lingered on the clean way he'd dressed the animal, the confidence in his movements. "You still do everything like someone's watching." "I do everything like it matters." He looked up then. "You ready for winter?" She nodded. "I've started quilting scraps for Sylvie's bed, and the widow havers gave me enough orders to keep my hands busy through spring." Yates leaned against the table. "You've made more of this place than I ever did alone." She reached for the kettle, setting it on the stove. "You gave it room to hold more." Later that morning, she found him in the barn, fitting new boards along the north wall. She stood with the baby at her hip, watching him measure and mark with a carpenter's eye. When he noticed her, he wiped his hands on a cloth and stepped down from the beam. "I want to build a second room," he said without preface. "Off the back of the house, something proper for Sylvie when she's older." She looked at him quietly. "You've been thinking about that?" "Every day since the first time she gripped my finger." Nara shifted the baby to her other side, heart thudding slow and full. "And what about me?" He didn't move. "You'd have the room beside mine, or mine if you wanted it." Her voice came soft. "I'd want yours." He stepped forward, careful as always. "Then what we've built together, it's not just shelter." She touched the collar of his shirt, fingers brushing the coarse fabric. "No, it's not." He nodded once, and that was enough. They planned the room together, measuring with string and chalk, gathering timber from the edge of the property. Sylvie sat in a sling across Nara's chest as she held boards steady, her laughter bright in the cold air. Days shortened and supper came earlier. They ate by lamplight, sharing stories over cornbread and thick stew, and when the baby slept, they sat close by the fire, fingers laced without needing to explain a thing. The first time Nara reached for him in the dark, he simply opened his arms, no rush, no noise. Just the long, slow understanding of two people who had already chosen each other in every small act leading up to that moment. They married in December. The pastor from the valley came up in a sleigh, his wife holding the Bible in her lap. Mrs. Havers brought a warm pie and a shawl she'd stitched herself. Yates shaved, wore his cleanest shirt. Nara let her hair down for the first time since spring. Sylvie held a posy of dried wildflowers in her tiny hand, chewing the stem as the words were spoken. They said yes without hesitation, without fear. That night, snow fell in thick silence, and they stood at the doorway watching it drift down, arms wrapped around each other, the baby asleep behind them. No more waiting, no more wandering. Just the three of them, held together by choice and time and the slow, steady work of love. Years passed. The back room grew into a second story. Sylvie learned to walk, then run, then read. Yates built her a swing between two trees. Nara taught her to bake, to hem, to listen for changes in the wind. Neighbors passed through more often. A boy from the next homestead helped with the cattle. Nara's sewing became known across the valley. Yates taught Sylvie how to ride, how to repair a fence, how to trust her footing. One spring, Nara planted sunflowers along the fence. By summer they towered above the gate, Each evening, as the light faded, Yates and Nara sat on the porch, her hand resting in his, the land stretching quiet and golden before them. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. They had built something whole, with ash in their past and strength in their bones. A life not born of rescue but of choice. A family stitched from quiet mornings, honest labor, and the deep-rooted love of two people who had nothing left to prove, and they were happy. Truly, deeply happy.